Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about how the ASP.NET Web API works. As I mentioned earlier, one of the key parts of ASP.NET that the Web API takes advantage of is ASP.NET routing. So what ASP.NET routing does is it maps URIs, incoming URIs, and verbs to a class that you create, and specifically to a method on a class that you create. This class is known as the controller. So in some ways, the Web API follows at least some parts, at least from a nomenclature point of view, of the MVC pattern. Your controller has to derive from a base class that's known as the API controller. So there's a common base class for when you're building and using the Web API inside of ASP.NET. In terms of mapping routes, there's a new extension method called map HTTP route. So it allows you to essentially register a different handler. And when you register that different handler, it's going to make the difference between the URI and verb getting routed, let's say, to some MVC controller versus getting routed to the API controller. So this little bit of magic, the HTTP controller handler takes care of. If you don't like mapping URIs and verbs to your methods, you can change this in the Web API. Again, as I said earlier, one of the major design goals of the Web API was to make everything very extensible, which means you can replace almost everything. And so if you want to handle incoming HTTP requests in a different way, you can actually replace that. If you're doing self-hosting, self-hosting makes it really very easy to replace that routing mechanism. And if you're interested in that, you can go ahead and take a look at the hosting module, which we'll go into detail on that. Or inside of ASP.NET, you can replace it with your own handler, and therefore you can change the way things are routed to controllers and methods.